Our final speaker of the evening is going to be Professor Gabriella Coleman. I won't do that. Okay. Anons will know who she is. She's, well, how you can introduce yourself, I guess. Okay. Professor Gabriella Coleman.
Thank you, Peter. A quick announcement. So after I'm done, we're going to show this film, right?
We are, within the time constraints we've got, yes.
Which is what?
Apparently, we're okay.
Okay, great. Just let me say something briefly about the film. It's called We Are Legion, and it's a full-length feature about the rise of Anonymous, and actually a huge portion of it concerns the rise of Chanology and Scientology, and it's very well done. I just ask that no one film it while it's being streamed, because the filmmaker is doing everything possible actually to get a theater run and then release it to the world, and has even walked away from a lucrative deal to do that. And it's an important film because I actually think there's also a lot of misrepresentations about Anonymous as well, and these kind of cleared up, and it's a great film. So hopefully we will get to see that. I'm also going to try to be brief. I was really so glad to be here and humbled and moved by what I've seen, and I think that's in fact what people have spoken about already has been the most important message. So I feel a little bit like a little bit strange ending, but let me talk a little bit about how it is that I got to Anonymous. And I would like to do 3 things. Just talk a little bit about how I fell into Anonymous, which was quite accidental, and it might parallel a little bit about the story about how Anonymous got to Scientology. Then discuss a bit about the role of the internet and activists in terms of arriving at this fight. And then finally, maybe just get a little bit of a sense of where Anonymous is today, which is still fighting Scientology, but also doing a lot more. So I'm an anthropologist who studied computer hackers and open source developers. And while I was doing field work in San Francisco, Scientology would come up quite a bit. And some people who were open source developers were also involved in the fight against Scientology. And perhaps it was the case that they knew someone who had been involved in Scientology, or more often what happened was that during the Usenet era, where there was a very popular news group that was critical of Scientology, many geeks and hackers had been part of that news group. But since it was not related to my field work, it was not about open source, I was like, interesting, but I kind of filed it away. And then, lo and behold, one year I ended up at the University of Alberta in a very, very northern town of Edmonton. And there happens to be Stephen Kent and the largest Scientology archives in the world. And I was like, okay, someone's sending me a sign here. I guess I'm going to start looking at some of the Usenet era protests where people finally started to be more explicitly critical of the Church of Scientology and circulating secret church documents. And I sort of didn't know very much about those protests. I knew, of course, a little bit about Scientology, what had been spread in popular culture. But when I kind of started to dip into the archives, which are housed in an old IKEA, and after I had met Stephen Kent, who had also dedicated a fair portion of his time to studying the cult and exposing it, I was like, oh, I sort of get it now why a lot of geeks and hackers are attracted to protest the Church of Scientology. And I could put it in these terms. So if there was kind of, let me put it this way. A geek or hacker's worst nightmare would be to wake up one morning and have their partner say, oh, honey, I'm actually a Scientologist, right? And why would that be? Well, there's so actually many reasons why that would be. I mean, the most obvious is that Scientology is not only a cult that, as everyone has talked about, is engaged in, ultra creepy shenanigans. It is a cult based on pseudoscience and technology that does not work. And for geeks and hackers, the most important thing is technology that actually works, and there's an allegiance to science, right? And then, you know, layered on top of that is the fact that Scientology is uber proprietary. It is founded by a science fiction writer, and geeks and hackers love science fiction. Scientology is the kind of evil doppelganger of the world of geekdom and hacking, right? And so I sort of was like, oh, I sort of get it. But of course, on top of it is the fact that Scientology, you know, went after its critics very aggressively, including going after, you know, core freedoms related to the internet, such as anonymity and free speech back in the 1990s. So it's not simply that geeks and hackers are just like Scientology is our perfect nemesis. It's that Scientologists also have dared to enter into the realm of the internet and sue geeks, hackers, and other critics who were engaging in circulating church documents and so on and so forth, right? So one of the interesting things was I then started to do this project, but I had to be secretive about it. I was not in the mood to get a lawsuit. And so I would give talks, but I would change the title. I never published about it. You know, I said maybe one day I will, but I was like, I'm not prepared to do that right now. And they went after journalists, academics, and critics, right? And then in 2008, lo and behold, something by the name of Anonymous shows up, right? And it was so fascinating along many, many, many different vectors, because I started looking at it right at the moment where they kind of appeared after that famous Tom Cruise video. And again, Scientology was trying to censor the internet, and that was like a really bad idea. And so Anonymous first starts to troll the fuck out of the Church of Scientology, right? And I was like, wow, this is kind of similar but kind of different to what happened in the past. And I started right then and there. And then, you know, a number of weeks after they were trolling the Church of Scientology, you know, pranking the Dianetics hotline, sending pizzas, taking down websites. It was kind of like hilarious. And I could just kind of expected it, like past trolling waves, to be a wave, it reaches the shore and goes away. But that's not what happened, right? What happened was that people decided to organize street protests. They showed up. I was there in the one in New York, and it was just kind of fascinating because on the one hand, some people definitely knew what the church had done and its histories. Other people were just like, no, I really just wanted to meet other people from 4chan, the message board from which Anonymous came rolling out of. And so it kind of straddled the line between carnivalesque shenanigans and like serious protests. But really a new political movement, not that trolling has its own politics, of course, but a kind of activist movement around Anonymous was being formed before my eyes. And it was just kind of fascinating because I think it's really important to think about the conditions under which people form a desire to act politically in the world. And there it was happening before my eyes, and it was incredibly inspirational. And also interesting because Anonymous, of course, uses some interesting tactics and was not willing to let go of some of its kind of lulzy, humorous roots as it became activist-oriented. And then so there was that kind of transition that was really interesting. And then the other aspect that was also amazing to watch was while definitely there had been critics before and activists who dared to come forward, and they were really, I mean, to do so was quite risky and had paved an important path. Anonymous, because of its numbers, I mean, that first day of protests in 2008 in February, there was over 100 cities, you know? So the numbers, the masks, it was just kind of a force to contend with. And it was incredibly exciting because Scientology in some ways is so interesting because it really is a microcosm of a kind of totalitarian society. And they had perfected these techniques that really kept people in its place. And then all of a sudden, quite accidentally, an entity had arisen out of the internet that became a formidable partner or adversary. And also, and this is one other point that was so interesting, was, Anonymous will often be like, we are anyone and we are everyone. That's kind of true, but it's also the case that, come on, a lot of people were kind of geeks or hackers or had spent a lot of time in 4chan. But at the same time, they didn't close the door to other people who wanted to participate, right? And so family members, ex-Scientologists also could come on board. And this is really an important point about Anonymous, which is that it's almost, in some ways, the complete opposite of the way that Scientology works. I mean, they're both kind of weird, and they'll both say this, right? But Scientology is not free to take and do what you want with it, whereas Anonymous is like other individuals have taken it, and there have been different networks and nodes that have appeared that actually have very different political cultures as well. So I'm just going to make one final point so that we can move to the movie, which is, let's think about what role the internet has played in bringing down Scientology, and what role Anonymous has played. And so one of the interesting things is that the internet is this like amazing, amazing sea, ocean, ponds of information, right? Like whatever you need to learn, it's on the internet. And it's wonderful because you can Google, Scientology and learn quite a bit. But often that's not enough. That's not enough for a couple of reasons. Well, one of which is, first of all, there's just a lot of noise out there, and there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot of different paths and roads that you can take. And in some ways, what Anonymous, or why it has been so important, is that it has channeled the existing information about Scientology and has delivered it with a big bang, like a spectacle. And it's been able to attract media attention. It's created really good videos and propaganda. And this is important. Exactly. And I think it's always been important. You need good stories and good narratives to get people's attention. And then I would say, given the fact that we live in, seas and oceans of information, you need it even more so today. And both Scientology and Anonymous are really good at spectacle, I mean, they kind of share that. It's almost, they're both kind of unbelievable in their own sort of way. The difference is that, again, there can be ethical spectacle and there could be very unethical spectacle. And I would just like to read a quote I have here by Stephen Duncombe, who has written a wonderful book called Dream, where he advocates for the use of spectacle in politics. And he says, look, it's really important that we base our politics on rationality and truth and exposing lies, but if you don't have like a compelling story, then you're not going to deliver the goods. And so he defines spectacle as follows. He says, spectacle must be staged in order to dramatize the unseen and expose associations elusive to the eye. And I would say that was what Anonymous was quite good at. And they've done so in such a way where they conjoin the wonderful mass that we see here with the pamphlets that expose the lies of Scientology and have conjoined fantasy with kind of truth and exposing the lies of Scientology. So I think I'm going to leave it at that, just because I think the movie has a lot more about the role of Anonymous, where they came from, and where they have gone since engaging in protests against the Church of Scientology. Thank you very much.
We are within the time constraints we've got, yes.
Which is what?
Apparently, we're okay.
Okay, great. Just let me say something briefly about the film. It's called We Are Legion, and it's a full-length feature about the rise of Anonymous, and actually a huge portion of it concerns the rise of Chanology and Scientology.
Our final speaker of the evening is going to be Professor Gabriella Coleman.
And he's kind of cleared up, and it's a great film. So hopefully we will get to see that. I'm also going to try to be brief. I was really so glad to be here and humbled and moved by what I've seen. And I think that's, in fact, what people have spoken about already. I
won't do that then. Okay. Anons will know who she is. She's, well, how you can introduce yourself, I guess. Okay. Professor Gabriella Coleman.
Thank you, Peter. A quick announcement. So after I'm done, we're going to show this film, right? And it's very well done. I just ask that no one film it while it's being streamed, because the filmmaker is doing everything possible actually to get a theater run and then release it to the world, and has even walked away from a lucrative deal to do that. And it's an important film because I actually think there's also a lot of misrepresentations about Anonymous as well.